Erev Tov, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our Kosher Curiosities series. We've just finished the last two classes speaking about Halav Yisrael, non-Jewish milk, or actually Jewish milk, and Halav Akum, non-Jewish milk, as well as cheeses and butter was our most recent class. And we are excited to move on to our next subject, that of non-Jewish bread, otherwise known as Pat Akum, Akum standing for Avodat Kochavim, non-Jews, and whether or not a person is obligated to eat Pat Israel, which is Jewish bread, Jewishly baked bread, bread baked by a Jew. So that's our topic for this evening, amongst other things. And then Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll continue into the concept of Bishul Goyim, general food that is cooked by non-Jews. But without further ado, let's just get into it. We are studying from the Sefer Peninei Halacha, chapter 28, for those that have the book at home. Patu bishule goyim. This is what he says. Matarat gezerat isur pat goyim, ve'isur bishule goyim ahat. The purpose of the prohibition of non-Jewish bread, the isur, the prohibition of eating non-Jewish bread or foods cooked by a non-Jew is one, which is limnoa hitbolerut, to prevent mingling between the Jews and the non-Jews. Now, maybe after we are done with this section, we will go back and learn the history about it, but that in essence is the reason why we are encouraged not to have non-Jewish milk and non-Jewish bread and food cooked by non-Jews. Ulam lahalacha yesh benehen hevdelin. You should know that there is a fundamental difference between bread that was baked by a non-Jew and food that was cooked by a non-Jew. Mitzad echad machmirim yoter bepat. On one hand, we are more strict when it comes to bread. She'af im hi misug garua. Because even if the bread is something that is really not that good, not that tasty, not that edible even, because bread is extremely important, it becomes prohibited if it is baked by a non-Jew. Ulam berov hadinim, but with regards to majority of the laws, because of the necessity man has towards bread is a staple of life. We will see in this shiur that we are more lenient when it comes to bread baked by a non-Jew, more than that of food cooked by a non-Jew. Therefore, in extenuating circumstances, in a place where there are no Jews that are baking bread, definitely, therefore we are allowed to purchase bread and baked goods from a pat palter. This is a non-Jewish baker, a baker that bakes bread to serve to the public and sells his bread. In that situation, it would be allowed when there is no kosher, or we'll call them Jewish bakers. Hapat ha'asura hi pat shene'efta al yedei goy. When we say that bread or pat that is prohibited, it is that which is baked by a non-Jew. Ben im afa ota bebeto avul mishpachto. This is whether he bakes his bread for his family. Ben im afa ota b'ma'afaya kedei lemochar rabim, or he is baking it for the public. Gam lechem garua shel aniyim. Even if the bread is so underwhelming that only poor people might have this bread. Shel olam en megishim b'seuda mechubedet, where a person would not dare serve that bread on a respectable table, which we're going to see is a very important element in cooking, bishule goyim. Kol zman shehu asui mechameshen minei dagan, as long as the bread is made from the 5 grains, yesh lo chashivut shel lechem, shehu ikar mezono shel ha'adam. It has the chashivut of bread, which is one of the essential parts of what sustains man. Ve'isur pat goyim hal alav, and that's why the prohibition of pat goyim, pat akum, the bread of non-Jews, would fall upon this. Aval lechamim mimine kitniot ketiras ve'ores. If you have certain baked goods that are made from corn or from rice, dinam kedin tafshil goyim, their law would fall into the category of cooked foods. V'lachen imra'ui lehagisham b'seuda mechubedet. If, as we're going to see next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, if they are served on a very respectable table, then asurim mishum bishule goyim, they would be prohibited because of that. Vimlo, and if it's not something that's a respectable food that you would serve to someone chashuv, and bahem isur bishule goyim, there is no prohibition of bishul goyim. Gam ma'afim shebederech klal mevarchim alehem mezonot, even pastries that you would normally recite the bracha of mezonot, kegon ugot bekarkarim, like cakes, kevan shehem mugdarim kelechem lemitzvat hafrashat chala, since they fall under the category of hafrashat chala, that if you were to bake enough or make enough dough, you would have to separate chala. Dinam kepat, their law is like pat. Ve'asurim ba'achila, gam keshe'en regilim lagisha mesuda mechuberet, and you would not be allowed to eat from those baked goods, even if they are not suitable to be served on a fancy table. Im Yisrael hishtatef ba'afiyat hapat, if a Jew took part in the baking of the bread, hapat ena nechshevet pat goyim umutal le'ochla. Now this bread is no longer considered pat goyim; it is now considered pat Yisrael, and you are allowed to eat from this bread. Lefichach, therefore, im Yisrael hesiket tanur. Let's say the Jew turned on the fire, or the Jew placed the dough inside the oven, or he stirred the coals of the oven, or he even added one twig to the fire, or he increased or lowered the intensity of the flame of the gas in the oven. Hapat keshera, the pat is allowed. The main thing is that Jews know that non-Jewish bread is forbidden to them. And once the Jew is taking part and is strict about this, and he has a part in the baking process, they now make it noticeable that they have to rely on their separation and separate from the non-Jews, the hapat muteret, and that's why the bread is allowed. If you look at the Rishonim, between the Sephardic Rishonim and the Ashkenazi Rishonim, you will find that many of the Sephardic Rishonim were more strict when it came to pat akum, pat of a non-Jew, more specifically the Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, of course, and when it comes to the Ashkenazi poskim, they were a little bit more lenient in a case where even if there was a non-Jewish baker, they did allow to have for a Jew to consume bread of the non-Jewish baker in certain areas. Whereas if you were a Sfaradi, and you were following the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, it was only allowed if there was no non-Jewish baker, if there was no Jewish baker around. But we're going to see more of these laws as we go on. Let's talk about pat palter. Now that we gave the introduction, let's talk about this non-Jewish baker, the person that is baking in bulk and he is selling it. Already from a long time ago, the rabbis had prohibited the consumption of pat goyim, of non-Jewish bread. Yehudim rabim hitkashu lishmor al gezerah. The problem was many Jews found it very difficult to keep this decree. Because, like I said earlier, bread is something that is essential to our survival. And not every person was able to prepare himself this oven all the time. So nowadays you go buy an oven and just plug it in or whatever. But back then you had to build an oven to bake bread, and not everyone was able to do it. Even though, nevertheless, that a small bet din can annul a decree that has not spread across the Jewish globe. Lo bitlu chachamim et gezerat hapat. The rabbis did not nullify this decree because it was accepted by a large part of the Jewish nation. And many people were following it. However, as time went on, when they saw how difficult it is to keep this gzera, Amru mishpatim shmehem. A lot of the laws or the judges that said mishpatim shmehem mashma shayar ui lebatla lesamsera. Maybe it is possible to nullify this decree. Bekach muva b'shem Rabbi. This was brought down in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Shepam keshaya basadeh. Once he was in a field. Hevi goy lefanav pat naeh. A goy brought a beautiful looking loaf of bread. Amar, and Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said, Kama nae patzo. Look how beautiful this bread is. I don't understand why the rabbis forbade this bread. Another time, when he got to a place and he saw that bread wasn't readily available for his students, Tama, he said, he wondered, En kan palter, is there not here a baker, a non-Jewish baker that can bake bread for the people? Palter hu nachtom, palter is a baker. Hainu mishe parnasato mafiyat lechamim. His parnasa is baking bread, baked goods. V'istapku, and there was doubt. Ha'im itkaven lomar shayara ui le'atir pat palter goy bimkom she'en nachtom Yisrael. And the doubt that arose was from this statement, worried about his students. Did he allow to eat the bread of a non-Jewish baker when there was clearly no other Jewish baker around? Because we have less of a reason to think that maybe the non-Jewish baker would start to mingle with any Jews, because it's not something that's done privately. He's not inviting you into your home. He bakes bread in bulk and he sells it to the public. He's not giving you for free in order to draw you into his home, because he's selling it. He wants to make money. It was similar to this. It was told about his grandson, that after they permitted the consumption of non-Jewish oils. That's something that we did not learn yet in this class. Maybe we'll get to it, but non-Jewish oils was once prohibited, and then the rabbis allowed it. Nishal, they were asked, Ha'im yatir gamet gezerat hapat? Should we also allow bread to be eaten from non-Jews? They knew that he was leaning towards it. His own grandfather felt that way. Beshiv, but he answered, Shelo yatir tapat, not to allow the bread. Because they had already permitted 2 decrees, or they nullified 2 decrees, and it's not appropriate for a bet din to permit 3 decrees. Because when a court of law nullifies 3 decrees, they are considered bet din sharia, which is bet din leheterim. They become a very lenient bet din, a bet din that allows everything. And they didn't want to have that name, so therefore they held back from permitting the bread of a non-Jew. And now we still have this gezerah of pat lema'aseh. Certainly, if you are in a place where there is no Jewish baker, you can go and buy a bread or a baked item from a non-Jew. On condition that all the ingredients of that baked good is kosher. But in a place where you can find a Jewish baker, like in Israel, for example, according to the Shulchan Aruch, there is no heter whatsoever to go buy from a non-Jewish baker. So like I mentioned before, many of the Sephardic poskim held like the Shulchan Aruch with regards to this, and did not permit you to buy bread from a non-Jew unless there was no Jewish baker. However, in many of the Ashkenazi lands, this was not followed, and it's brought down by many of the Achronim, including Rav Moshe Feinstein, that they would allow, even if there was a non-Jew. Even if there was a Jewish baker, they would allow it. So now, certainly in Israel, there's much less of a reason to permit this, as brought down, because everywhere there's Jewish bakers. So in Chutz La'aretz, it turns out that there were many countries that consistently, it seemed, ate bread from the non-Jews. Pat Akum was something very common in Morocco, in other countries in North Africa and the Middle East, and certainly, like I said, even for sure in the Ashkenazi countries, where their rabbis, their Rishonim, were more lenient than the Sephardic Rishonim. We see even in the Sephardic countries, history has shown that they were eating pat akum. So outside of Israel, we saw a lot more leniencies, and he's now talking about what took place. Why did this happen outside of Israel? Well, we know why it happened, because in Israel it's filled with Jewish bakers, so there is no excuse. So he says as follows: outside of Israel, במקום שקשה להשיג פת ישראל, in a place where it's difficult to get Jewish bread, וגם קשה לדאוג שישראל ידליק באופן קבוע את תנור האפייה, and it's very difficult, and it's difficult to worry to make sure that a Jew is turning on the fire and having some sort of involvement. הרוצים להקל, those that want to be lenient, רשאים לקנות לחמים שנפו על ידי פלטר גוי. They can purchase pastries and bread through a non-Jewish baker. מפני שבפת פלטר אין כל כך חשש קירוב לבבות, like we said, we're not worried that he's going to entice you to come join and be his friend. הוי והפלטר אופה כדי למכור לרבים. He just wants to sell to the public. כדין לחם כך דין עוגות. The same law would apply to cakes and pastries. וכל המאפים שנעשים מחמש של מיני דגן, and anything that is baked from the 5 grains. ובתנאי שכל מרכיביהם כשרים, again on condition that all the ingredients are kosher. אפה הפלטר לחמים עבור בני ביתו. But if this baker baked the bread and the pastries for his own house, asurim, in that case it wouldn't be allowed. אפה אדם רגיל לחמים כדי למוכרם לרבים, if a regular guy decided to start selling bread to the public, again, mutarim, that would be allowed. שהכל הולך אחר כוונת האפייה, everything goes based on what his intent was when baking this bread. מקום שהותר בו מפני הדחק לאכול פלטר גוי, in a place where it was allowed because of the circumstances to eat bread from a non-Jew. והגיע אליו נחתום ישראל. All of a sudden, a Jewish baker arrived. ההיתר מתבטל. Now, they no longer have this heter, this leniency. ואם הנחתום הישראל אינו יכול לספק את כל צורכי הקהילה, but if the non-Jewish baker is not able to provide for the entire community, או שהלחמים של הנוכרי טובים יותר, or if the bread and the pastries of the non-Jew is better than that of the non-Jew, tastier than that of the non-Jew, mutar lehamshich liknot ma'anochri. You are allowed to continue to buy from the nochri, from the non-Jew. Gam kasher lechamim shel hanachtom ha'Yisrael tovim. And that's even if the bread of the Jew is good. For sure, if the bread of the Jew is non-good, then you can for sure buy from the non-Jew. But even if the bread of the Jew is very tasty, but let's say he doesn't have all the types of bread that maybe the non-Jew can provide, he can go and buy from the non-Jewish baker what the Jew doesn't have. But if the Jewish bakers have enough product to provide for the keilah, or even though that the non-Jewish bakers have better bread, or they have something specific that the one item that the Jewish guy does not have, we cannot be lenient to eat from them. That's not a need. That's just a treat. Therefore, in all the borders of Israel, asur le'echol pat u'ma'afim shenochrim. You are not allowed to eat bread from a non-Jew. Because we have so much in Eretz Yisrael of Jewish baked bread. Now, when we said you're allowed to eat bread of a non-Jew in the situations where there is either no Jewish baker or the bread of the non-Jew is much better than that of the Jew, again, it's only on condition that the ingredients are kosher. In the past, we knew exactly what ingredients a person baked their bread. Every Jew was able to know whether or not the bread had kosher ingredients or not. However, today, today, bread and other pastries are made with abundance of ingredients to improve the flavor, or to make them larger, to make them look better, or to increase shelf life. These types of ingredients can be made from pig fat, or shel agalim, or other types of animal fats, or sheufku merchakim, or other things. Lefichach haeter lechol kayom bechutz la'aretz pat palter goy. The heter, the permissiveness to eat outside of Israel, the bread of a non-Jew, who bitnai, is only on condition shebatku umatzu shekol hachomarim shemehem echin et mafioshem ksherim, assuming that you know for sure that the ingredient in that bread or that bagel or that pastry is kasher. Kevan shebederech kal adam prati eno yodea livdok zok. Now, the standard average guy doesn't know this. He doesn't know. He has no idea what's being put in there. Bimkom sheyesh tzorech le'atir pat u'mafim shel pater goy, yesh tzorech sherabanim me'asviva yivdeku zot b'midah shenitan yoru heter. Since there is a need to allow these things because of the lack of kosher bakeries. I won't call them kosher bakeries, Jewish bakers in Chutz La'aretz. The rabbis of the hashkachot or other rabbis would go around to ensure that the non-Jewish bakers were using kosher ingredients. The truth is, this has been followed a lot, like I said, in many countries from North Africa. I know in France, after speaking to some members of the Paris Jewish community over there, it seems very well accepted that many of the French residents would go and have baguettes, a baguette from a non-Jewish baker, because the standard recipe of a baguette is pretty simple and pretty basic. It's almost the most basic bread that you can get, and therefore you will see many Jews that will go to a non-Jewish baker to have their French baguette, knowing that the ingredients of that baguette is kosher. There's another law here that he doesn't bring down, which I often like to teach to people that ask. Even assuming if you're going to have the bread of a non-Jew, there's a separate halacha that says that the bread cannot be made of dairy ingredients, because bread is often eaten with meat, and therefore you're not allowed to eat bread that is dairy. So while looking into the ingredients of the bread or the bagel or the croissants that you're eating, you also have to make sure that the bread is non-dairy. And if you are not able to investigate, if you are not able to find out what indeed the ingredients are in these items, then it is probably best to avoid non-Jewish bakers. Of course, unless you are in an area where there is no Jewish baker, and then in that case, in that situation, you would be allowed to have just plain bread, or go ahead and ask in those situations. Gam b'chutz la'aretz, he says, even outside of Israel, bimkomot sherov hatzibur nahag lehakel lechol pat pater goy, where he says that most of the communities were lenient to buy the bread of a non-Jew, and again, that's why you can go to supermarkets today and you'll find bagels on the shelf, packaged, and bread packaged with hashkachot on them that wouldn't be allowed to be done in Israel. It's only outside of Israel. Hayu rabim shehidru v'echmiru al atzmam shlo lechol pat palter goy. There were many that were strict on themselves not to eat the bread of a non-Jew. Omnam, however, letzorech gadol o chashuv, in times of great need, kegon letzorech seudat Shabbat. For example, for the need of seudat Shabbat, gam mehadrim nahagu lehakel lechol pat palter goy. Even those that were machmir during the week not to go buy from a non-Jewish baker, they would go buy bread from a non-Jewish baker for your seudah of Shabbat. Crazy thing about why? Because often the bread of the non-Jew was better and tasted better, and there was this inyan of making Shabbat oneg Shabbat, making Shabbat with better food, and if the better bread, the better lechem and challah came from the non-Jew. So as long as the ingredients were kosher, that's what they did. Kasher hameader shelo lechol pat pater goy me'arech al shulchano oreach. Let's say you are strict in not eating the bread of a goy, but you invite someone to your house that isn't so strict. He's not mehader. Instead of the owner of the home saying the bracha on the bread and cutting it and giving it to the guest, as long as the non-Jewish bread is better than the Jewish bread, mishum kevod haoreach umitzvat hachnasat orchim yibatzea et pat hagoy. He says, you go and cut the non-Jewish bread because it's better, and you're going to be hachnasat orchim. You're going to make your guests feel better, and out of his kavod. You may have eaten from your Jewish bread. That's the bread you said on. But you can still eat from the other bread. The first case I just mentioned is only when the balabait said the bracha for everybody. But if everybody is saying their own individual bracha of hamotzi lechem min haaretz, kefi sherabim noagim kayom, yavarech balabait al pat Yisrael. Then the balabait should say the bracha on the Jewish bread, v'yitin laorech levarech al pat goy hayafeh, and let the other guy eat the non-Jewish bread. Im hanishar mipat goy soed betzavta im chaverim she'em nisarim. Let's say someone is very careful not to eat the bread of a non-Jew, but he's eating on a table with a group of people that don't really care. Again, as long as the non-Jewish bread is better, you are allowed to eat with them the bread of the non-Jew. Because you don't want to give the impression that your ga'ava, look, I'm better than you with my chumrah. And now you're going to ruin relationships as a result of that. And that's brought down in the Shach and in the Ramah. If a person is careful not to eat bread of a non-Jew, but he can't find bread of a Jew, if he's able to find Jewish bread through traveling for 18 minutes, then he should go and get that bread. And if it's much further, then he's allowed to eat non-Jewish bread. And if he's on his way, if he knows he's traveling on Highway 401, and within 72 minutes he's probably going to get to a Jewish baker, then he should wait. But if the time to get to a non-Jewish baker takes longer, then he is able to eat non-Jewish bread. Just like those who are machmir in chutz la'aretz, outside of Israel, same thing is the law of Israelis that go to chutz la'aretz. And they are considered those that have to eat Jewish bread, and but in times of need, like we mentioned, you would be allowed to eat. The poskim write that even those that are mekil for eating non-Jewish bread, when it comes to the 10 days of repentance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the general custom is to avoid eating the bread of a non-Jew. We are more meticulous during this time. We try to limit our consumption and pleasure. So therefore, even though the non-Jewish bread might be better, but we during these days we try to come a little closer to Hashem, do things a little bit better, and therefore the custom was to refrain from eating non-Jewish bread, which only goes to show you that how much, by the way, that halacha has brought down the Ramah, but it only goes to show you that it was very, very common in the olden days for people to eat the bread of a non-Jew. And even today, like I mentioned, countries around the world, there will be people that will walk into a non-Jewish bakery and buy plain bread and bread with ingredients that are kosher. Today, you could go bread in the supermarket. They'll even show you the ingredients. Plain white bread, as long as it's not dairy, you have a list of ingredients that are there. If all those ingredients are kosher, you can go and buy the bread of the non-Jewish baker. Again, this does not include the bread of a private non-Jewish guy in his home. That is not allowed. But even here in a regular supermarket bakery with a bread that is made with kosher ingredients, you can go and you can buy it. And certainly, if you are in a city where there is no Jewish bakery, then you may buy from a non-Jewish baker as well, doing some basic investigation to make sure that the ingredients are kosher. Okay, so that concludes our shiur for tonight. We hope you can join us next week as we tackle the topic of Bishul Goyim, a little bit more of a complex topic and more relevant topic. Well, this was also relevant, but certainly the food that is cooked by a non-Jew has a lot of implications and relevance to us nowadays. Okay, wishing everyone a wonderful night. Be well.